What's up, everybody? I'm Matt.
And I'm Beth.
And today we're going to be reviewing the interior in the all-new 2023 Honda HRV. So the HRV has grown a lot. It's like 10 inches longer almost. And it's a little bit wider. And so you would think that would give you a more spacious interior. But in reality, it's actually not that much difference from a space standpoint. But there's a lot of really nice improvements in this interior otherwise. The first thing is just all the materials. And it's this new Honda interior they just introduced with the Civic. Now the HRV has it, and even the new CRV has it, and it just, when you sit down in here, it just feels almost like a luxury car with just how padded everything is.
Yeah, it's really plush. They really went for it on the luxury side, and it's really nice that most touch points you have here are your leather, and there is no piano black plastic other than around the shifter here, and I think that that's really great because most companies will always seem to put the piano black plastic in this channel and have just like a huge space where you can get really easily scratched. So it's really nice that it's just so padded, everything's comfy, and yeah,
I think honestly, like, aside from the Mazda CX-30, this is the most luxurious thing in its segment. Like,
definitely.
Hands down. So anyway, but getting into all the individual components here. First thing, sitting down in these seats. This is a loaded EXL, by the way. So this one costs around $30,590, including everything. And this is basically fully loaded. So this has all-wheel drive and all that. So that gives you, with this EXL trim, some of the nice stuff like the leather seats. That's only in the EXL. Same thing goes for this bigger touchscreen, which we'll get to in a minute and stuff. But these seats are really comfortable. I really like the stitching you have on them here as well. So they're not just like plain normal black, leather, and I also like that they're perforated so they breathe a little bit better here in the summer months. Although unfortunately there are no cooled seats. That's something though that's pretty rare in this segment. I think the Hyundai Kona and the Kia Seltos might offer that, but basically nobody else really does cooled seats in this segment anyway. So not a big deal, but really comfortable, all the usual adjustments, and they just feel nice.
And for the passenger, you do have those manual controls. They are not power. You cannot go up or down in this car, but I don't think that it's at a terrible ride height at all. I'm comfortable and I don't feel like I'm like way above the dashboard or anything, so I think that's really good.
Yeah, and that is one actually interesting change here with the HRV for this new generation, is they actually lowered the seating position, which is counterintuitive since most people want to be sitting up super high in their crossovers these days. But they lowered the seating position here a little bit, but they also lowered the window sills and the dashboards so that you still have excellent visibility, but you're sitting just a tiny bit lower than the old HRV. But that does, I think, really improve headroom, at least up front here, where you have, it feels nice and roomy. You don't feel cramped or anything like you sometimes feel in some of the other smaller stuff in this segment. And one other little thing to note is that the heated seats aren't exclusive to the EXL. I believe the Sport trim also has heated seats in those cloth seats, so at least you don't have to go up to the super high trim to at least get the heat. But overall great seats all around. Moving on to the steering wheel here, it's the same as the Civic and stuff, where it's just this really great wheel. It has a nice 9-3 grip, nice little 10-2 notches. These basic buttons here on it that are really well laid out, very easy to use, like the little scroller wheel here to control the gauge cluster. And the buttons all have a little bit of a nicer feeling here for these newer Hondas than they have in the past. And so a great wheel. But it is worth noting too, there is no heated steering wheel here. That is something I believe you can get in a lot of the other competitors. It's kind of a little bit surprising you can't get it here in this, but just one other little thing I want to point out. Moving on to the gauges here though. So all HRVs have this partially digital gauge cluster as standard. So you have an analog speedometer there, but it's really nicely blended in so that it looks almost digital. And you see on the left-hand side there, all that is digital, of course. And it's nice. It really gives you a good amount of customization. So if you want to have your basic driver information stuff in there, you can. But you can also have your audio in there. It'll display like album art in the gauge cluster, which is cool. Phone, all those types of things. Even your all-wheel drive torque distribution here, so you can see how the all-wheel drive system is moving the power around if you're driving in the snow and things like that. And so I mean, really nice and simple, easy to understand gauges. And I think they did a very good job with those. Coming over to the center of the dashboard here, again, you get this 9-inch touchscreen only in the EXL trim. If you go for any of the lower trims, you'll have a 7-inch touchscreen. And one nice thing about the 7-inch touchscreen is it has a tuning knob. Here on the big screen, you only have a volume knob and then this little tuning rocker. But the thing with the 7-inch screen is it's wired in Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. This 9-inch screen has the wireless functionality, but that is only here on the 9-inch screen. But both of them have the same menu structure. feature, and they all work basically the same. You just get these smart shortcuts here and this little row of shortcuts on the bottom of the 9-inch screen, which is a nice little touch. But navigating through radio stations, all that is very nice and easy. It also connected very well with the Apple CarPlay. Every time I hopped in the vehicle, there weren't any glitches or anything with that, and so it all worked really well.
But I will say one thing that I'm kind of upset about is that the volume knob is right next to the driver, who also has a volume knob on the steering wheel. So I don't know why most companies decide that they want everything to be right next to the driver. It's understandable. They don't want you to be distracted, but if they're putting it on the steering wheel, why not put it either centralized or closer to a passenger or whatever that can use it easier?
Yeah, I mean, at least in this vehicle, it's nice and small, so you don't have as much of a reach as some of these larger vehicles we review where, the volume knob is like 5 yards away, from the passenger. But one other little thing I really do like and appreciate about this screen is that there's this little shelf beneath the screen where you can rest your fingers so that it's easier to hit things whenever you're using the touchscreen. Other vehicles don't have anything like that, and so your hand is just bouncing around whenever you're hitting potholes, trying to actually touch what you want to touch. This gives you a nice way to stabilize your hand, and I think that makes it a lot easier and less distracting to use this touchscreen, because you can always kind of rest your hand there and know where you need to hit. And so I think they really thought through this very well, and it is also nice that, we mentioned the CX-30 having a more luxurious interior, but that vehicle forces you to use a controller wheel still. Having the touchscreen, I think, is easier, simpler, and really nice to have, especially with the smartphone integration of hitting your icons for your phone and stuff. So I think they did a great job. And in this one, it's also paired up with this 8-speaker stereo system. It doesn't have any kind of special branding to it or anything, but it sounded pretty good here. I believe it's 6 speakers in the Sport, and then the bass trim goes down to 4 speakers. But this 8-speaker system, it sounded, good, but it didn't blow me away or anything like that. And it's kind of unfortunate we don't have a Bose stereo option like you do get in the Civic as an option, but still sounded fine. I'm sure no one's going to really complain too much. And then coming down beneath the screen here, I also really love how you have this whole little vent area, and obviously it hides the vents really well because you don't have one continuous vent going across the middle. But it's real metal for this, by the way, and I really love how it just kind of gives us this very clean design. You have padding above it and below it.
I love the honeycomb pattern on here. I think that that's really cool and very unique, something that you don't see very often.
Yeah. And then the theme of real metal continues beneath that with these climate controls, where you have, this really nice knurled metal finish to these knobs that also have a really nice resistance and just feel really high quality. I like how they're kind of backlit as well, and just very compact with all the packaging, where you have the little buttons built into the knobs themselves, and just really wonderfully simple. There's not a million buttons here, but you do have physical controls still for stuff, which is great. Moving on to storage spaces here in the HRV, I think that's also one area where they're a little bit better than most of the others. So first off, in the doors here, you have a nice large pocket with kind of 2 bottle holders, 2 separate little areas there, which is good. And then in the middle here, you have a wireless charging pad here in the EXLs. The lower trims, that'll just be a normal bin, but it's a good amount of space there. My iPhone 13 Pro fits no problem, but I think a super big phone might be a little bit of a tighter squeeze in here. But you also see USB jack near there, and there's also 2 cup holders, which are pretty nice and deep, so they shouldn't get in the way of the climate controls too much. And then the real cool thing is you have this extra little bonus space underneath your shifter and stuff. And it's not massive, but you could fit, a couple of smartphones or something. And you'll see that there's a USB jack not only on the driver's side, but also on the passenger side.
And I love that there's one on the passenger side. It only has a charging function, but hey, it's really nice whenever you're the passenger and you'd love to charge your phone. However, the driver is charging their phone instead. So it's really nice to be able to have this on this side so that you don't have to put it way on the other side. That's normally driver centric, but having it here is really nice for the passenger.
Yeah, and even just having 3 USB jacks in general up front is kind of rare. Usually you have 2, and that's, makes sense. There's 2 people up here, but it's nice that you have 3, so you have even an extra spot there. You also have the center armrest, which does have a little bit of padding to it. I wish it was maybe a tiny bit more padding, but it's been pretty comfortable to rest my elbow on all week. And you have a pretty deep cubby. Again, for this segment of vehicle, a lot of these others have these tiny little square cubbies, and this thing's a pretty nice big rectangle, and you know, fits my sunglasses case very easily and all kinds of other stuff. I mean, a really large space. I'm still so impressed with just this whole area, like we were talking about earlier, with all of this. Every single inch of it is padded. They could have totally, you know, stopped the padding right by your knee, because, I mean, by the way, I love how you do have padding here at your knee. Much more comfortable than a lot of other vehicles where you're resting your knee on hard, rock hard plastic. I mean, so that would be enough. If they would have just stopped it right there and said, okay, let's just make this area cheap, I'd be like, all right, that's fine. We're talking about a subcompact crossover that's affordable. But they still, I mean, this whole thing is covered in, you know, vinyl, looks like leather, and it's just really impressive.
And the best thing about it is you do have that padding too on the passenger side.
So, I mean, it's be really great for long drives and stuff especially, but it's just, I just can't get over how plush it is. I mean, you sit down in this thing, you're gonna feel like you're, I don't know, like sitting down inside of a marshmallow or something. It's just everything being padded. It's so nice. There's high-end luxury vehicles that have less padding than this does. So, I mean, it's just wild to me that this is just as nice as it is. So anyway, but moving on beyond the front seat here, moving on to the back seat in the HRV, it's a good amount of space. Now, by the numbers, it's about 1.5 inches less legroom as far as, you know, the actual measurements go. I'm 5'9", me sitting behind myself. I still have several inches of legroom to spare. And I still think this is one of the more spacious vehicles in its segment, because something like a Hyundai Kona, for example, you're gonna be like munching on your knees sitting in the back seat of one of those things if you're an adult. You know, so I think this is a good amount of space. I would have to sit in the old generation to really compare back to back, but I would say that, you know, it still is gonna be one of the best ones in its segment. The only thing that is sacrificed a little bit as well is rear headroom, because of this swoopier design. With the old HRV, it was a little boxier with the way it dropped off in the back. This is a little bit more coupy, so that means that you do have a little bit less rear headroom, but I still had enough rear headroom personally, again, being 5'9", and there's some cutouts there in the roof, so shouldn't be too much of a hardship. But of course, that's something you want to go to a dealership and, you know, make sure you do fit well.
And also, one thing, if you do have a baby and they are rear facing, I had trouble putting my daughter into the back of this car without like smacking her head every single time we put her in. It's really kind of a squeeze to put them in. So yes, this is only a temporary problem until she is forward facing, but it is one thing to think about if this will be a parent car, a future parent car.
Yeah, and so that is one thing, you know, you just want to see, you know, there's other competitors that have, you know, less of a coupy thing, more of a boxy shape, where, you know, you probably will have a little bit of a better, you know, headroom situation in the back there to make it easier to get them in and out. So just keep that in mind. And also, you know, again, the slightly lower sitting position here of the HRV might also be affecting that for this new generation versus some of the others that might sit up a little bit higher.
And I will say that it also kind of depends on which car seat you do have. We have a Kiko one. I know that other brands are slimmer or smaller, so it just kind of depends.
Yeah, but one thing about the car seat that is, I think, way head and shoulders above a lot of others is how much space you still have with a car seat in place. So again, with this massive rear-facing convertible seat in here and enough clearance so that it's safely, you know, clearing the front seat here, I mean, both of us have tons of room, like so much room that I think there's more legroom up front here than what you get in a lot of compact SUVs. I mean, it is really spacious. I honestly don't know how they did it, because there's so many bigger vehicles where I'm like, I have like 1 inch of legroom to spare up front here when I'm, you know, having that seat set up, and this was like almost a normal seating position.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because I was trying to figure out how this all works, but I wonder if it is just because the dashboard does not come out very far. There are a lot of dashboards that do come out pretty far, and I think that this one is just very straight and not pulled out. And I also can almost extend my legs. I am 5'5.5", and I think that it's really nice that I can be able to do this and still have this car seat in the back.
Yeah, so I think that even though the rear legroom might not have grown really, I think that extra 10 inches of length in this vehicle must have gone to more front legroom, and that's kind of what gives you that little bit of an advantage, I think.
And also, one more thing about the back seat, I wish that it had vents back there. It does not have vents, and I think some of these smaller subcompact SUVs are the same and they don't have vents back there, but there's sedans that have vents back there. So I just wish that since this is normally a car that people get to carry other people around or multiple people, I think that that's something that should be looked into or at least added.
Yeah, so instead you just have a little bit of a bin there. And one of the interesting thing to note is that there is no full down center armrest. That is something you typically do get, at least in the higher trims, but most of the competitors do have that, and for some reason you don't have that here. And that was just kind of a head-scratching thing, because I mean, it means that because of that, you only have the bottle pockets in the doors as far as holding beverages. It is lacking a little bit in amenities compared to some of the other competitors, but again, I think having the space is really great and overall, you know, pretty well done. Moving on to the cargo space here in the HRV. Technically, again, by the numbers, it is a tiny bit less space than the previous generation, but it's mostly just because that, you know, the sloping roof means you can't stack as much probably as the old generation, but I think lengthwise you do certainly have more length than the old HRV, which was really a short little overhang there in the back. So I mean, it's a good amount of space, and whenever you lift up the floor, you'll see you actually have a spare tire too, which is kind of rare these days, so nice to have a nice large spare tire. And there's a power outlet back there as well. And so I think in practice it is going to be more space. Now, one other thing to mention is if you are a fan of the old HRV, you will remember it had a magic seat setup, which allowed you to flip up the seat bottom in the back seat here to give you extra storage. This doesn't have that anymore. So that's just one other thing to mention from a cargo space standpoint. But, you know, I think it's a good amount of space overall. And again, compared to most of the other vehicles in the segment, I think it is, you know, at least average, and I think slightly above average compared to, you know, many of the others. And so that's about it here as far as the interior in the HRV. I mean, overall, again, I think it's really going to come down to what your priorities are, but I think if you're someone who wants something that feels really luxurious and plush, and you don't want to deal with the controller wheel that Mazda forces you to use, I think this is the nicest interior in its segment. So I think they did an excellent job overall with this interior. But anyway, I think that's all of our thoughts here on the HRV, but let us know your thoughts on it in the comments below. Huge thanks to Honda for providing us here with the HRV to review. Be sure to check out the driving review as well for all of my thoughts on what it's like to drive, how it compares to its competitors, all that kind of stuff. But anyway, thank you all very much for watching. We'll see you on the next one.
Take care.